Hello and welcome to today's Supply Chain Management Review podcast. My name is Michael Levans, and I'm Group Editorial Director for Peerless Media's Supply Chain Group, which of course includes Supply Chain Management Review magazine. And I'll be your moderator for today's episode, where we're going to take a closer look at the role artificial intelligence is playing in today's procurement operations. I don't think I need to remind anyone joining us today that the chat around the application of AI in supply chain operations is reaching a fever pitch, and it's justifiably so. In today's fast paced world where efficiency and strategic insight are the keys to staying ahead, AI has made a dramatic entrance in the procurement arena. As we've been reporting in SCMR and across all of our supply chain titles, AI is no longer a science experiment. By all accounts, it's ushering in a seismic shift, and by all reports, it might be about to redefine procurement from the ground up. In fact, SCMR has just shared some findings from the recent McKinsey and Company report stating that AI is helping to supercharge digital procurement transaction speeds by up to 40%. And while our friends at Gartner, their recent study revealed that around 65% of the procurement leaders they just surveyed are betting big on AI to sharpen their efficiencies and decision-making prowess. Now, indeed, it all seems clear that AI has the potential to revolutionize procurement operations. And today, Kristian O'Meara, he's Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives with Jaggaer. He is here to put some context around all the excitement surrounding AI and its current and potential impact on procurement operations, and maybe even, help jumpstart your AI journey. Now, Kristian has over 25 years of experience in procurement, IT, and supply chain operations. So he has had a front row seat to watch all this great innovation unfold. Welcome, Kristian. We're thrilled to have you today.
Good afternoon, Michael. Glad to be here.
Outstanding. So, Kristian, let's just kind of get things started in our conversations in our podcast. We do like to, kind of get your take on where the current supply chain environment, is as it pertains to procurement decision makers. Where are we right now? And what are you seeing overall as we roll into 2024? Here we are in 2024, but, where are we from that 30,000 foot, take? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the senior executives I have the opportunity to work with day in, day out, Michael, really are, balancing three or four major things. That hasn't changed. It's been consistent pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and post-pandemic, right? They're constantly looking through the lens of third-party risk or compliance organization,
Mm-hmm.
right? They are trying to balance and be both financial stewards, environmental stewards in the ESG, environmental social governance realm, and they're trying to really, I'll call it, optimize their stakeholder impact. And that could
Sure.
oftentimes in the procurement world, that'll come in the form of cost savings or cost optimization, cost out, cost down, cost controls, volume controls within the organization. But I think, even the most recent sort of black swan event in the Baltimore Bridge collapse and
Yep.
the impact of ports, which Logistics magazine quoted me on last week on the impact it's having on the supply chain.
Yep.
Um, you know, Present throughout all of those challenges, and I think critical to the success, but often least focused on is the people aspect of it, the talent
Yep.
management, the talent development. It's, I think, a conversation point you'll hear me reinforce throughout our dialogue today, because it's one I really have tried to champion throughout my career. It's about the people enabling those things.
Yep.
And I think that's critically important as it relates to the
Absolutely.
topic of AI, because it can be an intimidating one for folks. But
Yep.
I think the landscape is changing, but we're definitely settled into a new normal post pandemic,
Yep.
and excited about the conversation in AI.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, Kristian, it does look like, supply chain disruptions as we're experiencing, it feels like almost on a weekly basis, and some of it's rather surprising, but, the preparation it needs to be made, right? With all, and it feels like we need to be in this new reality, right? So with this new reality understood, what would you say are maybe one or two of the biggest challenges facing procurement professionals right now? What are some of the biggest challenges?
I think they're constantly being asked to do more with less. And this is back to
Right.
that people aspect, right?
Yep.
So the efficiency gain, the perceived pressure of margin, whether that's top line growth or whether that's cost optimization, whether that's inflation mitigation or cost synergies and savings, chasing inflation back down in some cases within the shipping
Yep.
industry,
Yep.
has been an incredibly important thing. So efficiency as it relates to people is a absolutely important thing. And then I think one of the big other challenges and applicable to the topic of AI is just they're ingrained and overwhelmed with data and the
Yeah.
need to be, from an organizational leadership perspective, be data driven. I often hear some of
Hmm.
our C suite customers refer to the fact that they're data rich, but yet insight poor, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
real challenge is we now have this massive amount of data. How do we look at it acutely, specifically? How do we sort of consume it, action it, and bring outcomes for those stakeholders we
Right.
talked about earlier, be they internal to your
Absolutely.
organization in the case of suppliers, or sorry, external to your organization in the case of suppliers, or internal to your
Yep.
organization in the case of your financial team or your sales team and things of that nature.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, that sets us up perfectly now to kind of switch gears here, Christian. Let's turn our attention to some of the evolving solutions now available to procurement professionals. Obviously, as we've been chatting about, there has been so much talk about AI as a supplement or complement to our existing software infrastructure. Now, from your unique position at Jaggaer, can you help our attendees, or our listeners today, better understand AI's role and potential role in procurement, from where you sit at Jaggaer?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, right, the core principles that are important. And by the way, I have to go on record. There's very few topics my family knows or recognizes what I talk about each day. I listen to myself or my wife try to introduce me at cocktail parties or meetings with friends and tell people what I do. And my kids finally think what I'm doing is cool because I can talk
Yeah.
about AI and the application
That's
of it.
right.
And it seems like everybody's talking about it from
It is.
elementary school all the way up to the graduate areas. But as far as
Absolutely.
what people can do from a solution perspective, you know, the other thing I think that needs to be understood is from a solution perspective, these tools, these applications, if you will, have been in our case in our industry in use for over a dozen years, right? I think you
Hmm.
mentioned Gartner earlier. They've recognized
Yep.
Jaggaer as having a leadership position in their hype cycle as sort of the only S2P provider that has that ability. But for a long time, when I was a practitioner leveraging these, cooking my own cookies or drinking my own wine, as I like to say, um,
Yep.
I was using AI tools and solutions to drive data analysis, data cleaning, data visualization, helping add efficiency to what was otherwise a mundane, repetitive, monotonous task, right?
Hmm.
There's
Hmm.
tasks that people organizationally just refuse to engage on or refuse to do anymore.
Yep.
And that's the exciting area of AI. On the
Hmm.
other side of
Hmm.
that lens, I guess, comes the intimidation of AI from
Yeah.
the standpoint of, is this going to replace me? Am I going to become,
Hmm.
as our European friends say, redundant? How do I
Hmm.
avoid the intimidation factor of this? I choose to look at the lens, from the standpoint of the task I don't value, the tasks that are necessary to bring an organization forward from a transactional perspective are now being eased and automated. It's adding a
Yep.
level of accuracy, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
To the dialogue and discussion, ensuring that compliance with regulatory hurdles. Nobody wants to
Hmm.
be on the front page for failing to comply from an
Right.
organizational risk perspective. If I have
Hmm.
policy, be they procurement policies about spend thresholds where we need budgetary authorization and approvals, I can now reinforce or put guardrails up for people to thrive within there instead of being frustrated, instead of being blocked, building an appreciation and understanding this, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
I always use the term velocity because I think it's an important
Hmm.
one. It's not about just speed, it's
Right.
speed paired with direction, right?
Hmm.
How do I in the software world, enhance the time to value? How do I return a greater ROI to my
Hmm.
stakeholders that I'm focused on internally and externally, be they shareholders to the organization or otherwise? I think it's
Hmm.
incredibly important to the balancing act that we're asking the executives to thread. And that's why I think so many executives are, as you stated in the outset of the call, really betting big on this. Gartner
They
had
are.
research come out last week that said the
Yep.
majority of this is being pushed from the top down. Over
Yep.
60% of the initiatives are from the C-suite down into the
Yep.
organization.
Yeah. Let's and you just described a few of those benefits, but if you could kind of take that 30,000-foot view again, Christian, what would you say are some of the biggest benefits of using AI and AI capabilities in procurement processes?
Yeah, I think, effectiveness is clearly one.
Hmm.
So I must be compliant with X. Invoice
Yep.
automation is one of the things that's been around for, let's call it, a dozen years or so. There's
Yep.
post invoice compliant countries. There's aspects where across Europe in particular, or other parts of the globe, because of various things that are in play, the complexity around the invoicing process is increasing
Yep.
dynamically from a
Hmm.
regulatory hurdle perspective. I must clear this invoice through the tax bureau of government X. And these vary
Hmm.
from country to country. There's
Yep.
been
It's
delays
changing
with
constantly. Yeah.
that's right. And so how do I manage to be effective in my compliance efforts there? The cost of not being compliant is extraordinary. So AI has the ability to really be a mechanism, a vehicle for enablement from a compliance perspective, from an effectiveness perspective.
Yep.
I can get a very large ROI, not the avoidance ROI of cost um,
Right.
fines, but rather the it takes a ton of people if you're manually doing compliance than
Right.
if you're
Oh gosh.
automating that compliance with digital transformation and AI.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's get a little bit more specific too, Christian. Can AI help with the identification of like new suppliers or better pricing negotiations? If so, can you kind of share what that looks like, acts like? Is that a possibility with AI?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite use cases. I started my career trajectory, as a practitioner. As I moved into procurement for the first time, I was living in a small town in Arkansas, working for a certain retailer down there, and I cut my teeth here at Jaggaer, running and executing sourcing events, and it was really critical at the time. It would often take me, reflecting back, it would take me weeks or months to prepare with what was required to be a great practitioner, meaning
Yep.
I have an understanding of the pricing in my market. I have benchmarks
Yep.
available to me. I have third party
Yep.
research on my suppliers. I have historical price changes and projected future price changes, the market dynamics that drive that forward, be it a commodity or even non commoditized area.
Hmm.
Jagger now has ingrained or embedded, I should say, over 1,000 different categories where you can use generative AI. You can ask a question via a digital assistant. It
Hmm.
hits a private repository out there, and it pulls back detail to the user in a number of keystrokes conversationally, right?
Yep.
Here's
Yep.
what historically took weeks, months, depending on the category to pull together. And I can now do that sort of in the snap of my fingers with generative AI.
Yep. Yep.
Super cool stuff. Time saver.
Yep.
That was that research was intensive. It was time
Yep.
consuming,
Oh,
took a lot of people to do, and now we can really bring that information to our fingertips and have available as much information as the suppliers have about us in the public
yep.
domain. We can have about them and their products or services.
Yeah, all that minutia sort of evaporates. That's really incredible how quickly that can all be done. I can imagine how much time that would take and the effort that goes in, the hours. Now, speaking of, so what about measurement, Christian? How do you measure the effectiveness and ROI of an AI, of AI and procurement? How's that going to work or how's that working?
Yeah, one of my favorite topics, honestly, is the measurement and the reward mechanisms around this. Whether you're talking about individuals, I had a saying a mentor used to say to me: "Follow the money, and you'll understand
Yeah.
the behavior of an individual, of an organization, etc."
Mm-hmm.
I'm a real big proponent back to data driven decisions. How do I
Mm-hmm.
demonstrate to my organization that discipline of we take money, we take and invest it on something like AI. How is that
Mm-hmm.
solution integrated? So we start from our CRM solution has an integrated tool from a company called Kuvama that we work to help map out the business case, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many employees are we dealing with? What are the amount of POs? What's the amount of spend? How many invoices are we considering? Uh, how many suppliers, so on and so forth, depending on the area you're choosing to apply AI. And then I think it's
Mm-hmm.
critical to build that case study with conservative, clear, concise, and collaborated quantification of the numbers, right? So in
Yep.
procurement, we have this concept or supply chain of hard savings, cost down, cost out of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Financial
Mm-hmm.
organizations readily recognize that, acknowledge that, and you see it hit your GL accounts. In the many of the savings related to AI right now are soft savings, process savings, efficiency
Yep.
savings. But a good business case, a good ROI contemplates both from the impact to the people perspective. So I don't have to necessarily invest historically like I did as my organization grows in a linear fashion on the people
Yep.
side of the house. I can
Yep.
reallocate people more productively to other things, right? And
Yep.
we
Yep.
use third party research from the likes of a Gartner or a Forrester, and we pair that with our experiential outcomes that we have from our customers, sort of creating success. And
Mm-hmm.
we show them sort of how those cookies are made. We show them the recipe so they can challenge it. They can collaborate with us. They can refine it. If their cost of labor is something other than, let's say $76 an hour, that is a blended burdened rate for an employee in one of my
Mm-hmm.
particular customers, we let them change that to whatever their rate is. If they're using low
Yep.
cost country resources or something of that nature, they can make modifications to this so that they believe in the numbers are going to represent upward and outward of the organization from the real investment that's needed to have an impact and what is the ROI from an
Right.
AI investment.
Gotcha, gotcha. Now, Christian, we have a couple minutes left, and no conversation around AI could be complete without talking about some of the potential risks or challenges associated with implementing AI in an organization, a procurement operation, or any operation at this point. So, can you kind of just, as we kind of wrap up here, Christian, how do we, so what's your opinion? Where do you stand on terms of how you approach implementing AI into an operation, especially in procurement? What are some of your sort of key takeaways there for folks who are maybe on the fence, ready to start this journey down the AI path? How do you help them along with implementing and sort of getting over those challenges?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things to consider. Absolute table stakes that we haven't talked a lot about today yet is security and data privacy or
Yeah,
protections. Right? Those
sure.
are those are pass fail. You must
Hmm.
represent. You will maintain people's data security, and there will not be an exposure of that on a large scale or at any
Yeah,
scale other than the authorized use of it. Right?
right,
Next up is
right.
the organizational readiness and maturity. Am I ready to embark upon this journey? It's incredibly important to understand, are you ready to this? I've heard people
Yep.
say I can automate my mess and bring that forward in a rapid fashion if I'm
Yeah,
not careful.
exactly. Yep.
And then the other aspect of that is the people side, right? Which is we've already talked about a little bit, but
Yep.
taking stock in the human impact. I believe fundamentally in talent cultivation, right? Doubling down
Hmm.
in our teams that are already working with us, succession planning. Technology for the sake of technology is pointless, but what is the benefit
Yep.
it brings to from an organizational change management perspective must be shared with the team. And then the
Absolutely.
other leg of the stool, so to speak, on the people, process, and tech side is the process change. We
Yep.
really need to be considerate of, do our processes need to change with this additional automation with the additional data governance that's required. I think those
Yep.
are the ways
Yep.
I think about it.
Absolutely. So, just as we wrap up here, we are kind of up against the clock, Christian. But again, just maybe one or two more key takeaways here. Okay, so a lot of folks are out there just heard this conversation. Interest is peaked. There's no question about it. As I mentioned at the outset, this is reaching a fever pitch. Where and how do I start my journey with AI, especially within the procurement function? You just outlined a few terrific things right there. But if you were to boil that down, for those folks who are with us today looking to make those first steps, what do you say to them?
Yeah, I always start with the end in mind. What does
Hmm.
success look like, feel like? What are the
Yep.
outcomes you're trying to drive for the organization is absolutely paramount to that success. And then,
Yep.
depending on your organizational readiness, we can talk about, are those results best driven from sourcing use cases? Are they driven from contract generative AI use
Hmm.
cases? Are they invoice automation? Are they spend analytics driven? It's really individualized for the organization based on their maturity earlier. But I think those are the
Yep.
important things: is what do you want to achieve at the end of your journey? And
Yep.
start with
Yep.
that framework, critical.
Yep, absolutely. And sage advice. Kristian O'Meara, Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at Jaggaer. Christian, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us today. We want to thank you for making this conversation a reality. And we have a lot to think about, don't we?
Michael, I appreciate the opportunity. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Outstanding. You too. Christian, thank you so much. And thanks for everybody for joining us today. Have a terrific day as well.